You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Freedom you dream of in your lifetime. You're listening to On the Run with Remzo W. Martinez.
Hello, Forrest.
What's up, Remzo?
I've never done an entire episode about autism before, so I had to spend at least the last couple hours thinking of all the questions I could possibly ask and try and remove the assholiness out of it. Because no, like I'm dead serious. Like I was actually really trying to think of some serious questions, and a lot of them just come off extremely condescending. And hopefully today we can go ahead and destigmatize some of that, explain a little more about what's going on with you particularly. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. You had a show, and now you went ahead and started a new program, which is all about life and marriage and what goes on in your world as somebody who lives on the autism spectrum, married to somebody who's also on the autism spectrum. So I guess to kick things off, did you choose to be autistic? And if so, why have you chosen to remain autistic?
That's an excellent question.
Jump right into that.
I mean, it's funny because so most people who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum, they're diagnosed very young. You know, usually the parents jump on that pretty quickly. In the case of me and my parents, you know, they I don't think they ever once thought about doing it when I was still in high school. So I graduated high school still, you know, like having no idea what I really was. The only thing that we were able to come to was like something like ADHD. You know, we did go see a doctor for ADHD. I did take like ADHD meds, which I would argue just made me worse.
Stuff like Adderall.
Yeah, actually exactly like Adderall. Did I choose to be? I don't know. I mean, maybe. Legitimately, though, I found out on June 25th, 2015, I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. It was high functioning, which,
how old were you?
20. And actually just turned 20 like the month before.
Is that, please go ahead and correct me. Like, do people usually go in to get that stuff checked that later in life?
You know, I don't actually know very many people. Like I said, most people are very young. You know, like the people I know in my life who are also on the autism spectrum. I mean, they got checked out like when they were as young as 9 or 10. In my case, I think one of the reasons why we decided to check me out, see if I had autism, was because at the time I was living with family friends because my parents live quite a good distance away from the city. They live out in the middle of nowhere, much like our mutual friend Dan Smots from The System Is Down.
He lives in the shed. I don't even know if that wife and kids that he keeps talking about are even his.
I know him personally. We go to the same church, and even I don't know if they're real.
He looks like a shed person.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he looks like a relic straight out of the 2000s, man. All Linkin Park and Eminem and whatnot.
Dragging a Game Boy Color in his cargo pants pocket.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like before you know it, he's got a Zoom, in his pocket somewhere. But it's kind of like Dan Smots. But no, when I was diagnosed, it was because we felt like it was important due to the fact that I was living, quote unquote, on my own with family friends because I didn't drive at the time. I attempted driving like about 10 years ago, and it just did not work out for me. Anxiety was.
Well, how do you know you were autistic and you weren't just part Asian?
No, actually, I come from a French heritage, even though I do not have a French bone in my body, it would seem like. Yeah, no, it was, there were signs, there were signs throughout, especially that time when, when I was living with family friends. That's when that stuff really came out, because when you're living with your parents, you feel like you got this, almost like this protective like umbrella over you, and and you don't learn certain things quickly enough that will help you be independent. So when I was living with family friends, they even kind of started to notice signs. There was just stuff that seemed to fly over my head, like certain social cues, verbal cues. It used to bother me so much when I couldn't interpret people's facial expressions. Like, that would drive me nuts. I would overthink that stuff like all the time. There were certain things that I just couldn't really figure out. Despite the fact that my dad like had me read books on finances, I wasn't good at it at all. That was stuff that needed extra training. Serious anxiety behind the wheel when I would try driving. There were several people, that tried to get me into driving and they couldn't do it. And that was the reason why I was living with family friends in the city in the first place, was so that I could take the bus to go to college. I would have to go into one of those like disability services at college so I can take tests by myself, because for some reason
this is before or after you were diagnosed?
Before. Yeah. A lot of different things that just sort of like added up. Again, just not understanding social cues, not being able to like remember things a lot, which is kind of like tied to ADHD in a way. Sometimes autism and ADHD can go hand in hand. And also just seeming to lack empathy. Apparently I just didn't give a shit about other people. Like if other people were sad or they were angry or something like that, if it didn't affect me, then I didn't care. I tended to lack that empathy that allowed me to connect with other people on an emotional level. Still do. Just stuff like that, and just sort of added up. And then eventually my dad was like, you know what, let's get this checked out. Cause I really struggled in high school. And I was really struggling then. It was pretty clear that I wasn't ready to be independent, but we needed to figure out how we can overcome, some of my worst habits so that I could reach that point. I was not an organized person mentally or physically. I would skip over basic things, like hygiene that would just allow me to be presentable in society. I always kind of did feel like that outcast. I tended to always attract the really weird people, and they would have autism too, or they would have ADHD. Just about every single friend of mine, at the time and even now had something. I seem to build that personal community of autists, I guess. Does that answer your question at all? I feel like
that does. And I mean, that must be like a weird identity type of situation, because it's like you live your entire life and then you get to this point where you're diagnosed with something like that. And at that point, was it like, did it feel different? Was it like, oh, I have autism now? Like, how does that sink in when somebody tells you that? Because it's like, it's like an albino person finally discovering that they're black. They didn't think of themselves as black. They thought that they were, just really, really, really scared of the sun. But suddenly, that happens. Yeah, I'm using a joke, but I just really don't have another example. I can only imagine how I would feel should somebody come and say that about me, because while you may have expected it, it's just kind of like at 20, that must be deep.
So, that's a perfect example, Remzo. It reminds me of the albino dude from Logan, where you literally expose him to the sun and he starts burning off.
Yeah, that guy was like, there was something up with him. Albinos just don't get along in society. But yeah, I mean, what was it like? I mean, do you see yourself as an autistic person? Do you see yourself as a person with autism? I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, they kind of lead with that. It's like that kid in South Park, Tom Malkison or whatever, Scott Malkison. He's got diabetes. It's like he just kind of leads with that. I feel like that's how it is for a lot of people with, physical or cognitive disabilities or something. At that point, it kind of becomes their identity.
Right. Well, you're not wrong about the fact that being diagnosed at 20, cut real deep, because it did. I remember when I first got the diagnosis report, and I do explain some of these things in my new podcast, but, I can explain them here. Basically, I get the diagnosis report. That thing was like 25 pages long, which I can only imagine when I'm skimming through it and it's like 25 pages long, I'm thinking to myself, wow, there really must be a lot wrong with me. Whereas other diagnosis reports I know about that people got, those were only 3 or 4 pages. It's I get 25. Wow. Okay.
Special.
There's quite a lot here to unpack. I am a special snowflake. So I'm reading through the diagnosis report though, and there was a lot listed there. There was obviously the stuff that the psychologist was able to unpack just through asking me questions, and kind of associating different things with them. He said I even had some symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, even though there's no key event in my life that would really trace that back to it. I remember reading through the report, and it was really sad because it wasn't just a diagnosis, leading to pointing to the autism spectrum. It was also kind of an analysis of where my mindset was at the time. Anxiety was something that was so serious for me that it was almost impossible for me to have a good focus on things that needed to get done. I struggled to kind of balance between work and school. I was a very, very easily distracted person, and I felt very vulnerable at the time. I was kind of sliding into depression. My first girlfriend had broken up with me just several months before I got diagnosed. So, there was kind of that on my shoulders. It was pretty awful. I look back on it now and I think it's kind of funny, but 2015 me didn't think it was funny at all. But another thing that really stuck out to me in that diagnosis report was that the psychologist kind of concluded that the kind of mindset I had was I had a severe lack of a sense of direction in my life. I really had absolutely no clue what I was doing.
Who is the doctor to make a claim like that, though? I mean, that sounds like everything else sounds like it's trying to help you. That goes into kind of a subjective category.
Feels a little bit personal, right?
Yeah, that feels like that sounds like kind of and I'm not saying they meant it with malice, but if I heard somebody say that about me when I'm just going in to get examined like that, I'd feel like that's kind of like a personal attack.
Yeah, it's
whether it's right or wrong, it's not really his or her place to say something like that.
Yeah, it's dude, I came here to find out whether or not I have the X gene, not, some therapist visit. No, but at the same time, though, he was right. I made that very clear in my interview with him that I just felt numb at the time. Yeah, I was going to college, but I didn't really know why. I was doing this part-time job, but I wasn't really going anywhere with it. The best thing I can say about it was that I didn't get fired like the first 2 jobs I had before that. I do remember that report cutting pretty deep because, when you put everything together about, my attention span, my interests, I also have the tendency to be obsessive with certain things and only have 2 or 3 interests at a time. And I want to talk obsessively about them or do things surrounding them, which, I had to learn over the years to prioritize differently, shift my priorities around so that the things that will actually benefit me in the long run, prioritize, Star Wars, or whatever my obsession or my hyperfixation would be at the time. And because I was in that place in my life, though, where I just felt directionless, I think that's one of the reasons why the report cut so deep, because it told me everything that was wrong with me, but it didn't necessarily give me pointers as to where I can go from there. And that was something that I had to learn by myself. I had to take several steps back. I had to move back in with my parents. I had to take public transportation that was primarily for elderly people, just to get into town, go to college, go to work, all that type of stuff. It really felt like a massive step backwards. And it took me at least 3 years before I was finally able to go out again and do things on my own. But at that point, I had a better sense of how to manage my finances, how to get around, all that type of stuff. People on the autism spectrum tend to take longer. They almost have like a delay in being able to learn how to get certain life skills down. And it's not even uncommon for those people to have to go back to their parents eventually and try to relearn things. So yeah, that report, I mean, it was kind of like a sucker punch to me, even though a lot of it shouldn't have surprised me. But yeah, I was 20 years old. I was already trying to live independently. So it's not like I was 9 or 10 and my parents were like, okay, now we know exactly how to raise our child until, he graduates high school or something like that. It definitely put me in a much more awkward position.
How do you feel when you have to get back to that point? Because from everything you just kind of brought up, that's a huge stripping of independence. I've talked about it on early episodes of the show. Like I'm very lucky, especially with how the last few years were, that after college I moved home. One, because I was dealing with a very severe neck and back injury. And then I was also just chronically unemployed. And luckily, I say luckily, I had my family around me, because at least that way I had a place to live during the pandemic. But overall, there are definitely many benefits, and I consider myself blessed that I wasn't a total burden on my parents. The one thing that bothered me was that I felt I was doing something wrong. Like, here I am in my early and mid 20s at the time, and I'm not very independent. I feel like I have either stunted my own personal growth or I have done something wrong. And I tell people, even if you're not making a ton of money, if it's enough to at least get out, a year, even a couple of years at home, sometimes if it's purely for the financial reasons, that makes sense. Like, that's very common. And I don't think people should be judged for that. But it gets to a point where it's like, you need that sense of you're on your own. You make your own decisions. You need the good and bad that come with it, because that's just part of being an adult. So I can only imagine going from this diagnosis to immediately taking steps back when you had just tried to go about that next phase in your life.
Yeah, well, part of it, I mean, I won't go too much into detail about it here, but part of it was the environment I was living in away from my parents was not a healthy one. And so that was like one of the biggest reasons why I had to move out, move back. My dad just felt like I wasn't ready. And my habits, my mindset just kept like slipping and slipping and slipping the longer I was there. And I didn't even really realize how just broken I was by the time I, came back to my parents' house. Because, when you go back to your parents' house, like, you just feel this, like you said, this independence is stripped away from you. But it also just feels like you lose this position in life where you felt like you were in much more control over yourself and your circumstances. And so like when I moved back in with my parents, the habits grew worse. I was like, sleeping a lot more to like this, to unhealthy amounts. My parents had to wake me up multiple times because my ride was waiting for me in the driveway to take me to work or take me to school, whichever one it was. And I just kind of like, I was very, very passive there. I had no idea what to do. Eventually, I finally was able to get myself back up, and I was able to, to get out. And that's one of the points of my podcast, is to encourage people on the autism spectrum that, yeah, you can do this, that you can just find your passion, find the thing that, like you were really talented with, that you had the skills for, and you can make just an amazing life out of it. I tend to be a very egocentric person, unfortunately. Like people on the autism spectrum love to talk about themselves, because, by talking about themselves, they're also talking about their interests too, sometimes. And so like, I tend to be an egocentric person. So I just completely lost my train of thought where I was going with that.
You're an egocentric person. You talk about yourself a lot.
Correct. Yes. I don't like to talk about myself too much on the podcast. I want to be more like encouraging to people by sharing like little bits of my story here and there, so that they can get just enough in order to feel inspired or encouraged and motivated after they're done listening.
Let's fast forward a couple of years to kind of get to this point. Where did the idea of a podcast come down? Because so let's fast forward. What have you done between when you finally started getting things back together to where we are right now? One, you get married.
Yeah. 2,
you've got a full-time job. 3, you're doing extracurricular things. I know that you worked you worked recently as a volunteer for a camp for children in need. And now what you have is a constructive hobby, which is doing a podcast in which you're trying to reach out to people like yourself. And we've talked offline. I don't know anybody who does a show like you do. And I'm saying that from a matter of just what I know, and also from the research that you and I did when we were looking around. That's what I think is amazing about podcasting, because if there's an area of the world that has not been filled, that doesn't mean that there's not a need for it. It just means that nobody else has gone in and kind of taken the lead. And I think it is kind of funny for me in a way, because when I was on your previous podcast about a year and then some ago, I didn't think you had autism. I thought you were just an awkward person starting a podcast like many of us. I know I felt awkward starting a podcast. It wasn't until you said it that I thought you were being self-deprecating. And I'm like, oh, he thinks he's got autism because he's kind of weird. It's like, no, it's like, oh, this is something different. And it must be a vulnerable place. Did you know that you wanted to talk about this stuff? I mean, I've got insecurities, and I've got things about myself that I struggle with, and I've got things that I'm not always happy to talk about. I think I've done a good amount of it on the run, but this almost seems like I've wondered, and maybe we can discuss this together. Why haven't other people on the spectrum come out and done what you're currently doing? Because not only are you doing this, you have a Substack account, which I'll link to in the show notes, folks. You should totally go ahead and subscribe to that. You recently got published talking about this over at themighty.com. I mean, you've gone from just a person who wanted to just have people understand more of this, and you're now an advocate for people on the spectrum to be better advocates for themselves. That's a giant freaking leap in just a couple of years.
Yeah. So, I mean, where do I even begin? First of all, as a side note, the Mighty has been absolutely amazing. The majority of my subscribers actually come from the Mighty. There are people from the Mighty that found my profile and found that I was like posting links to my Substack on there, and they subscribed through that. So just, it's awesome. Like, I would recommend it for anyone who is like, deals with mental health and is trying to share their resources. It's great. It's actually a community that interacts, is active. It's fantastic. Actually, I wanted to kind of go back real quick and more directly answer your question as to whether or not I see myself as an autistic person or someone who just happens to be on the autism spectrum. For the majority of the time between my diagnosis and now, I more or less just saw myself as someone who happened to be on the autism spectrum. I didn't really think about it too much every day. After a little while, I didn't really talk to people about it. But it was becoming increasingly clear to me over time that the market was in desperate need of more voices on the autism spectrum. And I mean, forget trying to find anything that's about like marriage on the autism spectrum. You're not going to find it out there. I really did try, Remso.
You can literally write the book on this.
But I have a story for that too. So shortly after I was diagnosed, my dad was like, you should write a book about this. There's a draft, on my computer that is not yet finished. And it has been sitting there constantly being tweaked, edited, changed, what have you, for like 6 years at this point. It is also called The Pancake King. That's where the title came from, which I guess for context's sake, that name came from a pastor that me and my family, we used to go to his church, and he called me the Pancake King when we would go to this pancake place, and I happened to have more pancakes than everyone else there. I can literally tell this story in 10 seconds and move on. No one ever has to ask again, right? It had a lot to do with seeing what the market was lacking, because one of the keys to creating content that can be unique to you is creating content that you want to experience. You want to experience, but you can't find it. If you can't find it, why not do it yourself? If you're passionate enough about it, do it yourself. That's why my previous podcast, Squeaming, was such an epic failure on all levels, because that podcast was just everything I was already listening to. The market is saturated with, political podcasts or libertarians sounding like absolute morons for 2 hours.
That's where the real autism insults really start to seep in.
Well, the funny thing is, John Odermatt on Finding Freedom asked me the same question, like, what do you think of, the fact that people call libertarians autistic people? And I'm like, I'm not really offended by it, but I find it funny that I'm both. So, at the end of the day, if it was directed at me, it'd be a compliment. But it was mostly the market. So again, I've had this book that I'm just still tweaking, changing, expanding. I mean, it's hard to come up with a final product when your life keeps changing every year and there's always something you can add, something that you can change, and it just makes the book better in the process. It will come out. That book will, see the light of day at some point. I just can't make any promises on the release date yet. Depending on how this podcast is able to take off, then I will probably feel more motivated to finish it. But like we already established, I tried a podcast that just sounded like a lot of other podcasts that I was already listening to. It didn't really offer anything new, didn't do anything unique in the market, just kind of drowned in a sea of irrelevancy, really. So this podcast was where I was finally able to decide, what is it that we really need? And there are several things that come with this. Are you okay with me explaining that?
Please.
Okay, so number one is the fact that, like I already explained, the market is severely lacking in resources when it comes to not just the autism spectrum in general. That has been getting better over the last decade, but there's also the aspect of marriage. I read a bunch of marriage books before I got married, but it had absolutely nothing to do with autism. And while that didn't make the books meaninless, I didn't feel like I could connect with those as much. And especially after,
if you don't mind me asking, how long had you and your wife been together before you got engaged or before you got married?
Before we got married, that was about 4 years, or 3.5 years, actually.
So that's well after the diagnosis.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yep. And so we were dating for 3.5 years and been married for 2.5. And it has a lot to do with the market. Like, there are a few rare exceptions. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary on Netflix called Autism in Love. That was one.
No.
Yeah, where it was actually two people on the autism spectrum. They were engaged, so there was a slight difference, but it was there. And then there was a Netflix series that came out recently. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was about like it was a reality show where they were putting two autistic people together, to see if they'd be dating material and stuff like that. And there was at least one married couple in there. But again, these are extremely rare exceptions, and there are no books, there are no podcasts about it. I scoured like Apple Podcasts for this stuff. And the most that you'll find a podcast about autism from some, like quote unquote expert who isn't on the autism spectrum herself. She just researches this stuff. And then there's like maybe a podcast or two about like what parents can do for their autistic children. And that's all fine and dandy, but there was nothing about marriage, like nothing about this stuff. I was looking at this stuff right before my podcast launched just to like really make sure that there was nothing I can find in the market. And, there just was nothing. So that's number one. Number two was the fact that there is almost nothing about like marriage on the autism spectrum out there in the market. But boy, the market has no shortage, on the other hand, for negativity and pessimism. And honestly, this near nihilism that has just really been, choking culture for the last 2-3 years. I would say that it kind of more or less started mildly in 2016, but it's just gotten to the point now where there is so much noise that's become almost impossible to tune out. And I became very disenfranchised over the last half year with, political podcasts or podcasts from, even like libertarians, right-leaning people. I mean, they always talk about how paranoid and over the top the left is, but come on, the right is probably just as bad, if not worse.
I have found that if you look at, and it's especially been since I moved out to Wisconsin. If you look at my podcast feed right now, it's all sports and comic books. It's all sport. It's all sports and comic books. All the audio books I'm listening to are biographies. And if people look at like my, if someone were to pull up my YouTube right now, it's a lot of finance stuff because I love learning about finance, but it's also a lot of sports. Now, if people ask me, Remso, were you a sports person? I wouldn't have typically said that. I really got into sports over the last couple of years because I needed an outlet. Because like you said, there's just so much shit out there that a lot of what I do with my job, it involves me having to know what's going on in the world. Right. But, there needs to be a release for that at some point. And I feel like a lot of people, they fall into one of three areas, and I'll shut up. So because I want to hear what I'm saying today. One is they're just passive consumers. They never create anything. They just love to take it in and bitch about it. The second are the people that continue to consume all of the stuff, but they want to do something about it. Like they want to start a new hobby. They want to stop a bad habit, or they want to do something, but they're still struggling to find it. And then there are people like you and me where it's like, if we actively see something that's not good for us and not good for others, we're either going to go directly away from it or we're going to create stuff. I'd like to think that the stuff I create goes directly away from a lot of the bad things I'm trying to get away from in the world. But I also have things that are intentional to pull me out of it in a way. And if I didn't have that, I would be a much more different person.
Yeah. And actually, this is a habit I've been starting to like develop over the last couple of weeks. Most of my podcasts at this point, almost all of them used to be political. Now, almost none of them are. And, and it's like, it's not like I was like cherry picking and I'm like, okay, I'll put away the left-leaning podcasts, but I'll keep the libertarian ones. No, libertarians are like, just guilty of some really stupid crap. And I used to love Timcast. Now I can't stand it.
I always thought there was a third eye underneath his beanie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Like kudos to them for trying to like start, kind of an alternative culture and stuff like that. But I can't stand Timcast anymore. I am like on the edge when it comes to Louder with Crowder at this point. It's just, for me, people have just become so alarmist and so negative and so, again, near nihilistic that we have forgotten to do one of the most important things that we're supposed to do while we're still here. And that is inspire and motivate and encourage the next generation. If we keep telling them every episode of our show that, like by 2030, they will own nothing and be happy, and that is their future, it is set in stone. There is nothing they can do about it. We are in a collision course, then we will have failed the next generation. If we can't encourage them and inspire them and say, you can do this, do this to better your life. And if you work on bettering your life, you can better the lives of everyone around you. If we don't give them some sense of hope, then the next generation really is screwed, and it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
go ahead. No, please.
Oh, okay. And so I was just looking at that because I saw how that was affecting my mind, and I'm like reading all these garbage hot takes on Twitter and, listening to a couple of podcasts that were just all negativity, all pessimism. I mean, I can only listen to Tim Pool talk about Civil War like so much before I'm just feel like flinging my phone out the window. And it's like, we need to bring that positivity back. Yes, a lot of stuff in the world sucks, but we have like all this stuff. To kind of quote Gary Collins a little bit, we live in the best place in the world. We live he says this maybe 50 times, and yet somehow that's less annoying than everything that Tim repeats. But Gary Collins says we live in the freest country in the world. If you can't make it here, you're not going to make it anywhere. He's telling the truth, and I think young people really desperately need some positivity. They need hope. They need encouragement. And so that's what I feel like I can do with my podcast. And obviously it's more directed towards people on the autism spectrum, but that's where I feel like my community is. I want them to feel like they can have a future, that they can be financially successful, raise a family, find their passion, and live the best life that they can. So those are the two main reasons for me.
So how is it talking to your wife about this? Because now you're really the center of your podcast, The Pancake King. And folks, I'll go ahead and link to the show in the show notes. You can go ahead and check it out afterwards. Now you're more of the focus. Now you're really bringing people into your life. What was that conversation like with your wife? Because, part of the tagline is life and marriage on the spectrum. That means that you're going to talk about your marriage. That means you're going to talk about her in some of these spaces. What was that like? Was that an intentional conversation, or was it something you had to kind of, warm her up towards?
So I'll put it this way. I explained to her that I was going to do a podcast. I wanted to do a podcast about autism and life and marriage on the spectrum. And her response was a very, very autistic, okay. And she was totally supportive of that. And, she's not in every episode, but it is very much a collaborative effort outside of it, because I'll usually, for certain episodes where it's just me running solo, I'll write the scripts for it, and she will read them and give me feedback and kind of let me know if there's something I should change, or maybe something about her she'd rather not have in there. So it is very much collaborative, like behind the scenes.
What's been the response from people as you've already released a couple episodes so far? Do they see the difference between this and your old show if they knew about it?
Well, no one was listening to my old show anyway, so we can't even make the comparison. So far it's been pretty good. As of this conversation that we're having, the third episode came out today. And it's really exciting because I have seen it's slow, but I haven't seen an uptick in the subscriber count on my Substack. That means that whoever is subscribing knows whenever I release a new episode. I'm not entirely sure yet whether or not I want to keep Substack as my primary podcast hosting service, because there are a few things I feel they somewhat lack, but it will do for now. And the responses so far have been very positive. Like, unlike the last podcast, I actually shared this one around like crazy and was able to get some feedback from people, even people that I know, but I don't know them too well. They were able to respond and say this was great. And I'm like, great, but don't tell me, tell Apple Podcasts, or something like that. That's where it really helps. This private text from you to me, it's great, but I need you to put that out publicly if you can. But so far it's been pretty good. It's been promising, and I'm really excited to see where the future of it goes. I kind of missed just a little portion of my explanation for why I wanted to go in this certain direction as far as the negativity aspect goes. Is it okay if I share that? Yeah. Do we have time?
Yeah, go for
it. Okay. So, like, part of
it's my show, God damn it. We can go as long as we want.
Okay.
It's my party. Good. I can cry if I want to.
Well, what was it? The you and the degenerate panel can go on for like 2 hours. So I don't know. So the negativity aspect, like consuming so much negativity and pessimism and stuff like that actually really did start to take a mental toll on me. What's kind of funny is my friends noticed it. And when I say my friends, I mean my Republican friends, my Democrat friends. I mean, they all had like different opinions on certain issues, but one thing they all agreed on was that I was going nuts. They kind of started to see that it was taking a mental toll on me because it was all I was really consuming. I had very little hope for my future. I was scared for my family's future. And
are you talking like in general because of shit that's going on in the world, right?
Yeah, in general, yeah. And so obviously, like, it was becoming so noticeable to everyone, including my wife. It just dampened the environment or the atmosphere in our home. And then I started to get really obsessed with the whole thing with like the World Economic Forum's just Nazi ramblings and all their like Great Reset stuff. And that's kind of like when my wife decided, you need to stop. You need to calm down. Because it's not like she, is a doubter of the stuff, that's all conspiracy theory and stuff like that. No, she's aware that they're insane, old shitty people, wanting to pull this shit on people like us. But the problem was that I wouldn't stop talking about it. I wouldn't stop obsessing over it. You see the autistic connection now just a little bit? It was becoming one of my hyperfixations. And so she finally told me in the car on a Sunday morning that she was just tired of it. She felt like the Forrest that she knew was just really slipping away. We had already technically had this conversation before, and I said I would change, but I didn't. And that's when I kind of started to realize that, if this stuff is affecting me to the point where it's causing ripples like this in my marriage, that's crossing the line. That's a deal breaker. I'm going to pull out of this stuff. I'm not going to really look into this stuff much. And I'm going to move forward with the mindset of I'm going to work on creating my own destiny. I'm going to work on having the best life I can. And I'm also going to go with the encouraging thought that just because that stuff is out there and just because some idiot from the World Economic Forum said it, doesn't mean it is all set in stone, because it's all up to God, right? I'm a Christian, so I'm just going to throw that out there. It's, it's all like in God's hands as far as I'm concerned. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I had to distance myself so much from the negativity. So I knew how that stuff would affect one's mindset. So through this podcast, I'm hoping that I can help other people's mindsets to be more positive. And so now the types of podcasts I listen to are actually more like comedy driven, or even stuff about finances. I'll listen to a podcast episode that talks about how you can not only survive, but thrive in a recession. That doesn't really scare me. I lived through the 2008 recession when my dad lost his job, this stuff has happened before. So I just, I'm trying to change, what I basically consume. And I want this podcast to kind of add to the positive spectrum when it comes to media and consumption and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely in an area. And I mean, I started reading The Mighty a couple of years ago. I think when we were talking, I was the one who recommended that you look them up and reach out. Yep. Because I think your content is perfect for what they're doing. And it's a great opportunity for you to get exposure like you have so far. But I started reading about them when I started reading about, manic depression, about chronic pain, about, what's it called when you can't sleep? The guy from Fight Club had it. Insomnia. I was an insomniac. I still do to a degree live with chronic pain in my neck and my left shoulder. And, when I graduated from school and, life was not great, like I really fell into a very difficult time in my life. And what I like about The Mighty is that, I'm not so like what you mentioned earlier about the shows that do talk about autism. It's never anybody that has autism. I understand that to a degree, but I also, I'm also like, just because somebody didn't live through the Holocaust doesn't mean you can't be an expert on it. I think that's kind of like a leftist thing that other people say sometimes. So it's like, well, you don't have the lived experience. However, it felt really good to hear from people that understood what I was going through. And you said one word, which is so vital, which is community. Because if you think you're alone, the worst thing you can do when you're in a very tough spot is to think that you're alone and nobody understands it, and that this is a completely isolated moment and you just feel like there's no escape. And sadly for many people, that is something that happens. What I like about that, and what I'm really excited to see with your new podcast, The Pancake King, is that finally somebody can say, thank goodness somebody understands me. Because what I really don't admire about a lot of really well-intentioned people is that they see the issue, they understand the solution, but that connect between thought and action just doesn't occur. I remember one time where this really became very obvious for me was when I was trying to bootstrap my first solo documentary, where I had a camcorder, an iPhone, and some old recording equipment. And I asked people for money. I was trying to raise $500. I got $50 from a friend. And at the time that covered gas and a trip to McDonald's. And the entire time people are hearing about what I'm doing and meeting me, they're like, oh, I'm so glad somebody's doing this. This is really needed. But nobody ever supported me. And the thing that I had to get off the ground was that, listen, I have to do this. And luckily, what's great, the one good thing about the internet is that a lot of other people were able to kind of take that message, and a lot more people are more successful than I am, which I'm not upset about most of the time. But it's like we live in a time where if you want to go ahead and create content that you love, if you understand why you're doing it, your first principles, why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, and you're doing it for the best of intentions, the sky is the limit. And I think, just from when I was looking up similar shows, there's no other show like yours. And I think that's important for people to understand. Whether this stuff matters to you, I think what we should be celebrating is the fact that there is no lack of space in the world for people to find something that they want to talk about or create or share with others, and then do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's my encouragement to people on the autism spectrum, like through this show. It's like, you can make it, you can do this. You can basically, what was that Robin Williams said in Good Will Hunting, like you're to Matt Damon, it's like you can do whatever you want. You are bound by nothing, so what do you want to do? Actually, I watched that movie like almost immediately after I moved back in with my parents. And that movie made me like cry, man, because that whole movie was about a kid like literally turning the exact same age I was. He like it was a movie about him finding his purpose, figuring out what makes him unique and what he can bring to the world. And that was so inspiring to me.
I totally get it. I'm like that with The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. The Secret Life of Walter. That movie is that movie brings tears to my eyes. I genuinely love it because I felt like very much for a good chunk of my young life, and now that I really think about how much pressure I put on my own shoulders, I should have. If I can go back to 18-year-old Remzo, I would tell him to chill out more and to not take things so seriously. But I felt for the longest time the biggest crime against myself is to be a passive bystander of my own life instead of actively going out and trying things and being thankful for the things I do have when I don't feel grateful. And, I saw that movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, after not having seen it for about 4 years. No, for more like 6 years, 6 years. Yeah, no, like 6 years, because I saw it in college, my freshman year of college. And I watched it again in 2020 before I was launching, On the Run. I just finished 2 seasons of my TV series, The Witching Hour, which was a big, giant, awesome adventure. But as I was settling in for the podcast, I was like, I gotta refocus, which is, people can do the things that they dream of. The difference is how they're going to do it. And, it's, this is a total tangent, but I'm going to say it. There are a lot of other finance people that talk about generational wealth. If I have kids, I don't want to give them anything. I actually want to spend all my money before I die, because the one thing, I'm dead serious. I've thought about it. I want to spend it all before I die, because what is the purpose of doing all this preparation? And regular On the Run listeners might pick up on this a bit, but like, what's the point of doing all this hard work, of doing all this stuff, of making and raising, investing all this money, if it's not to buy your own time back in life? Because it's not about money. It's about time and what you can do with your time. And I want to do with my time fun, awesome things I can share with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of Secret Life of Walter Mitty myself, like severely underrated movie. And what that movie did for me was that it just kind of like reminded me really that life. I
went to freaking Iceland because of that movie.
Yeah. Like, hey, you have a car? Yes, we have a red one and a blue one. Such a great moment. There's literally a blue and red.
When I got off the plane in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, because there's only one airport in the entire country, I got picked up in a bus with a bunch of other tourists by a guy who looked like angry Santa Claus. And he kind of just grabbed our luggage and is throwing it in, and he's yelling. And my father, who was there with me, he's like, "What's he talking about?" I'm like, "I don't know, but we do whatever angry Santa says. We just get in the bus, okay? I don't even know if he's our driver." It was fun.
Yeah, no, it was such a great movie. It just showed me like to go out there. I mean, yeah, obviously traveling was kind of one aspect, and that's something that I'm kind of doing like in little ways now, So one of the changes or one of the differences with this podcast as opposed to the last one is that instead of doing every single episode in my crammed little office corner in our apartment, I'll go out. Like I'll go out and record a conversation with someone at our local coffee shop. Or there's an episode I did with one of my friends whom we know by Blade. We did one.
Still not his freaking name.
It is. Oh, it is.
I believe it.
And we recorded an episode by the by the Mississippi River, we thought that was going to be a failure, but it actually came out sounding great. And we're just doing these little things, like I'm going places, I'm making it feel like a little bit mobile. And yeah, it's still within the general area, but give me time. I'll probably start, traveling like a lot further and see where it takes me. And, and no, I don't really care about how much gas it's taking me to get place to place, because I'll go to Costco where it's the cheapest gas in the area.
Yeah.
We're still below, like, as of this conversation, Costco is not even charging $4 a gallon, dude. It's amazing. But I'll just stop at Costco, fill up on gas, and go wherever I just feel like I want to go. My wife works at a library, so sometimes I'll just go to that one, sit down with my laptop, and just work on stuff, man. I want to just be out there more, go to as many places as possible, talk to as many people as possible. I'm talking to more people in this podcast than I ever did in the last one.
What do you think is the difference?
Difference how?
Like why do you think you're talking to more people now? Was that an intention?
Yes, actually. It actually was exactly the intention, because I want to talk to as many people as I can, go to as many places as I can. I want to be adventurous, and I want that to be felt through this podcast.
I feel you. Well, Forrest, I'm going to go ahead and leave a link to the show on Apple Podcast, as well as a link to your Substack account where you do writing as well. And go ahead and send me your link to your profile at themighty.com. I'll include that for listeners. For everything else, if people want to chat with you online, get to see more of what you're up to, how could they do so?
Yeah, so I do have a Twitter handle. It's kind of funny because Substack has a feature where when you're putting up your latest post or you're putting up your latest podcast, you can set it so that it'll automatically post that stuff on Twitter, which is great for me because that means I don't have to touch Twitter. So you'll probably won't see very many responses from me on there, but you can check me out on my Instagram. It's the Pancake King 95, and follow me there, where I'll kind of put up snapshots where this is where I'm at recording this podcast episode, or here's a little announcement or something like that. Just little things like that. But if you actually want to talk to me, if you want to reach out to me, I'm going to say reach out to me on the Mighty, because honestly, it's becoming a great resource.
That's awesome. Forrest, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, if you enjoyed conversations like this with Forrest and our other awesome guests, please go ahead and do me a quick favor. It costs you nothing but a few seconds of your time, a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Gets this message out to everyone across Al Gore's amazing internet. As always, go ahead and follow me on Instagram at OTR_Remso, REMSO, and on Twitter at HeyRemso, HEYRMSO. As always, be safe, be good. Good night. For those of you listeners who know my background a bit, you might remember the stories of my first few jobs after college. From being a mall cop to selling makeup door to door, I realized that I had skills that were being underutilized and that these minimum wage jobs couldn't support me or last forever. I spent years going through YouTube, reading books, listening to podcasts, and taking enough online courses to reinvent myself as a professional copywriter and digital marketer. Years later, thanks to my side hustles and drive, I've worked with national news outlets, multi-million-dollar tech startups, nonprofits, and celebrities to build their brands and drive sales. None of this could have happened if I didn't develop in-demand skills. I had to do this alone, but you don't have to. You have Hustlers University 2.0. Hustlers University 2.0 is a community where you can learn real skills to earn money online today, starting with side hustles you can use to elevate your game. I'm not just an advocate for Hustlers University, I'm also a student. Every professor is verified to be making $10K to $500K monthly in their selected field. You get full resources, lesson plans, and an active community of thousands of other Hustlers University students working on skills such as stock analysis, cryptocurrencies, e-commerce, copywriting, which was my favorite course, one I actually went ahead and took last month. And as a copywriter of 7 years,
I even took a ton out of that, including some of the resources I was able to take over to my day job. You also learn freelancing, financial planning, affiliate marketing, business management, and so much more. If you're tired of depending on a boss who hates you to deliver your paycheck, or have learned since the lockdowns that controlling the source of your income is vital to your individual freedom, sign up for Hustlers University 2.0 today using the link in the show notes. I'll see you there.